fully integrated cloud platform managed by HashiCorp. So I guess we have both console and vault in public beta. If you're interested in that, we'll eventually post a link. One of us will, and you can go ahead and sign up. But today we're going to be talking about generally HCP, because I don't think we actually talked about what is the underpinning of HCP / the API. And we have a little bit of a surprise today. Now, of course, in keeping with our true directive, which is to try to live code as best we can. And if it doesn't work, then we'll try to explain a few things. Today, we're actually going to do something fairly challenging. I have a lovely configuration from, from ECS, an ECS guide I wrote for console. And ECS basically is AWS Elastic Container Service. And I was challenged by some of the console team to basically write an ECS integration guide between the cluster and HCP console. HCP console offers the console server. So I wrote this guide, and initially when I did this workflow, and Andrew, I imagine this was probably a similar workflow for you when you were testing anything that you were doing on this platform, but you would go in and you would either through CLI or through API or through the UI, go in and create peering connections. And here, you manually create this, and you create your network, and you create cluster. So for those who are not as familiar, basically you would go into the UI, you create a HashiCorp virtual network. This virtual network basically will house any of the clusters or resources. Right now, I don't have any resources at all, so you won't see anything. But this is basically the network that is managed by HashiCorp for you. Andrew or Tracy, is there anything I'm missing with this? Any nuances in the HashiCorp virtual network that I forgot to say?
Not that I can.
Yeah.
You got it as far correct as far as I understand it. The network's kind of the main place that we start to associate resources with. Like if you don't have one, you can't do anything else. But yeah, it's where we try to keep main resources associated and stuff for sure.
Yeah. Right now, this is on AWS. So if you're familiar with AWS, basically it's one VPC in one account, and then you bring your own VPC in your account. So then you have to have a peering connection, which is why you would create this peering connection here. Typically, I would do this by UI. So I would type in the AWS account ID. I have one available. That's where this cluster name is located. So it's plopped on a VPC. And then I have to set up a whole bunch of other things like VPC CIDR block. I create the connection, that peering connection. On top of that, if I wanted to create a console cluster, I would have to click create a console cluster, right? And in this case, it would go through a couple of different configuration requirements, console tier, network accessibility, console version. Now the question that I have for Andrew is there potentially an easier way to do this, right? Because if you have a number of console servers that you plan on putting together, or networks, or even vault clusters, if we wanted to go into public beta and look at the vault clusters, is there an easier way that I could automate this?
Well, if you're familiar with some of the products that we've got at HashiCorp, we've got this one that's really good called Terraform that allows for declarative language that you can have more programmatic ways to do provisioning of your resources. And as we were building out some of these public APIs and UIs, we knew that that was something that we would want to continue doing because we want to dog food our own products at this company. And so we've moved forward with building out a Terraform provider for HCP that'll allow you to provision these types of resources in a more programmatic way, such that you don't necessarily need to go through UI elements, and you could do it via the CI/CD pipeline if that is need be. Yeah, and so that might be something we might be showing.
I think we have a question from the chat, right, Tracy?
We do. While you're pulling that up, Andrew, what is your cat's name?
Well, my cat isn't even present in the background, but my cat's name is Turtle when she's here. Sometimes when I'm talking, she'll think that I'm talking to her and she'll show up. So if I talk enough, she might, but I think this is usually when she has her naps. But my dog back there, her name's Pepper. She got a haircut and she looks really nice, and she's having a nap too.
Turtle and Pepper.
Yes.
Oh, wait, we have a second one. What's your favorite resource in the provider?
Oh, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. Okay. All right. Back up. All right. It's okay. We're good. All right. So speaking of which, the thing that we're hinting today is that we're actually going to show the definitely not ready for production provider right now. So this is going to be a provider for HCP. I think that there's, as far as Terraform providers go, I think this is a pretty useful one, especially because if you want to create the HVN, you want to get the parameters and information. It's a nice way to do it, especially because, hey, I've created ECS using my, my Terraform already. So previously, I'll show kind of what happened before. I would have to pass in a bunch of variables, including but not limited to the variable blocks for the CIDR block for console. I would have to pass in like all this host stuff. I probably still have to pass in all this stuff, which you can correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew. But on top of this, I had like a lot of really weird feature toggles within Terraform that basically said whether or not I manually configured the peering connection between HVN and my VPC. And so there's a lot of weird nuances that happened as part of this Terraform code, and including but not limited to a module that I wrote to basically do the peering, and to do the security group IDs and set everything up for me. So really I had already committed to Terraform. The only problem was everything else had to be configured by UI. So today the challenge, we may or may not get to do it. But the challenge is, can we write Terraform such that this no longer, basically I add the missing piece, which is I don't have to go into the UI to configure the HVN and the console cluster. And we can do some maybe fancy depends on maybe with some of the module stuff here. But let's first start with the provider. When you add a new provider, to your Terraform code, I use a providers.tf. I don't know what everybody else uses. Like, you can put in the chat. We can debate this all day. But right now we have the basically this is using Terraform 0.14. So it's using this required provider syntax now. Your version is no longer within the provider block. It has to be within this top level Terraform directive and under required providers. But I have already downloaded the not ready for production HCP Terraform provider plugin here. It is running, it's stored locally. So when I built it, it's stored into my local, I guess, provider registry, so to speak. And this one I got tripped up on. And I don't know how many people know this, or I just was like, just not able to figure this out. It took me a while. It turns out that when you do a local source, you source it to localhost/providers/HCP. So my question to Andrew is, when you test the provider, are there tips and tricks that you use when you're testing locally? Do you do any versioning? Do you just sort of build the provider as you go along and then hope it works? What are some ways that you develop a provider?
Yeah, I just have a kind of typical feedback cycle for when I would do development. I'd make my code changes, I'd build it, and I would just test it. And within the repository, we had a make command that would do the building and then push the provider binary to the expected path that Terraform would expect. And so that was able to get my feedback loop for my development to be pretty quick, because I could just execute this command after making code changes and then reinit Terraform from there and just try to do my plans and applies and all that. So
cool. Yeah. And is this the first provider you've written? I mean, you did work on HCS stuff, so I'm curious what other providers you ended up.
Yeah, I mean, before I came to HashiCorp, I hadn't written any Terraform providers, but yeah, this one was the second one that I've worked on, but I did work on HCS, which had a lot of corollaries to HCP because it, in terms of some of the services it interfaces with, that has similar contracts, and so there was certain schemas that were very similar between the HCS provider and the HCP's providers resources. But yeah, it was this one was the second one that I had worked on beyond HCS, but that was the first one that I had worked on, and it was a fun experience because I used Terraform in the past, but not to the point where I was actually writing the providers. But it was a very refreshing and enjoyable experience for sure.
I was just about to ask you that since I had done the live with Katie and Patty, so I'm pretty sure that they are probably happy to hear that experience is delightful, because that's not how I felt about it at first.
Yeah, I mean, I found it to work really well. There was some well-defined patterns. Even documentation was nice. They have recently made some changes to being able to auto-generate documentation based on some of the fields that you described in the schema. And so that made it really easy to just document it in the code and then have well-formed documentation and stuff built from that, that I think just feeds into HTML and will be ultimately on the Learn pages and stuff in the future.
Okay. Nice. All right. Any questions in chat? Oh no.
Yeah, I'm trying. You notice I kind of avoided that one, and people in the chat, please give us your thoughts on this. Which provider is better, HCS or HCP? I'm
supposed to respond to this?
I don't know. I'll just say whomever would like to respond. I noticed the person that asked the question didn't respond either. Oh, yeah. I've got one HCP though.
I mean, I think both of them had their own like pros and cons. Like there's the HCP one was interesting because it was interfacing directly with the HCP APIs, where with the HCS, we were integrating with some of the Azure Marketplace APIs. So they both had their pros and cons that made them easier or not easier to write, but I wouldn't say one's better than the other. If you want to go on Azure, use HCS, and if you want to try to do stuff on AWS, Azure, use HCS, and if you want to go do stuff on AWS, use HCP.
That was a very nicely worded answer.
It is, but you know what? It ends up being all of it would be Tracy and myself who end up like guinea pigging the the provider. So we'll see after this, and we'll get back to you on which one we think is better. I don't know. They probably are both the same, in some regards. Okay. So we're going to move on to the next step in provider, right? In using a provider. I've referenced my local provider. And now I need to configure a provider block. Usually in Terraform, when you have a provider block, that's where you have authentication parameters or any special configurations. Now, Andrew, is there anything special about an HCP provider block that I need to configure? I assume I need to authenticate against HCP. So can you walk me a bit of how that works?
Yeah, that's correct. So what's going to actually have to happen is you're going to need to get a service principal, and with that service principal, we create a client ID and a client secret, and those will be provided to the provider so that it can authenticate properly or provide proper authentication credentials whenever making these requests.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So in service principals, I would see like I am, and then I would go to service principals.
Yep.
And I would click this create. And in terms of the service principal, when it says name, is this just like a service? Is the service principal sort of more like a service account?
That's a good way to think about it. And like the naming doesn't need to be anything like unique. It's for what you want to test it for. That's what you would want to have it as. And I'm sure if you're somebody that's building service principals to be used by automated systems, you might have like a dev one or a stage one, stuff like that. You can probably make yourself an admin if you want.
So yeah, that's actually a good question. Does, if I don't make myself an admin and I make myself a contributor, right? Does the scope affect how Terraform executes it, or it's just better to make yourself admin in general?
I'm not super familiar with all the different backend differences between the service principals. I would assume. I think you're going to be able to ask the UI saying there. Yeah, I think you're still going to be able to create resources and stuff. I think an admin's the one that's going to be able to invite like new folks in or add other type of roles beyond just viewer and stuff. Yeah, but I think admin or contributor should work for what we're trying to provision.
Yeah. Thank you, UI team, for designing that for us.
Yeah. And to folks that are watching, I don't believe that we've exposed this publicly to all users yet. So if you were to try to navigate the UI, you most likely will not see this just yet, but it's coming soon.
Hence not ready for production. All right, so I've got this service principal now, and now I need a key. I assume this key is important for something.
Right, and what I would suggest is to, whenever you're generating this key, to not do it on the stream, because it is client ID and secret, and we don't want that to be a compromised thing. So once you create the service and key in principle, I can't remember if clicking that actually generates them. I think when you click that button right there, it'll pop up a modal, and then they'll have two fields that you can copy for the ID and the secret.
I see. Okay.
You sure you haven't seen a HashiCorp live before? Because Rosemary is known for doing exactly what you just asked her not to
Well, I deleted after.
Well, yeah, it's totally fine, because like as soon as you can remove the service principal after the demo, so it's not like it's going to have that much power. But it'd be really funny if somebody, well, they're not going to grab it. They don't have access to the provider just yet, so you should be good.
Oh, it could be. It could be. Okay. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to resume the share because I did generate it. You have to take my word. I did generate it. But the client ID, you'll be able to actually,
That's fine. Yeah.
That's fine. Okay. So I have now, is this OAuth? What is the authentication mechanism going on in the background? Are you familiar with what it is?
I believe it's OAuth.
Okay.
I think that's correct.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Yeah. I have no documentation. So what is I guess either I'm going to go dig through the code and look for the field or something else.
So there's three things that you need to provide. You'll need the client ID, the secret, and then your project ID.
Oh, wait. Does it work? Wait,
like
did the language server do this? What?
Oh, I can't wait till I have that office hours. That's going to be fun.
Oh, wow. Wait, okay. So for those who missed it, wait. I think the language server actually picked up the schema. I don't know.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Most excellent. Okay. Client
That's
ID.
pretty cool. Andrew, while she's doing that, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
When you're building this, like, how do you choose what's a sensitive value? Like, how do you come up with what to hide in all of this?
I mean, for me with that, it's like I put on my security hat, and it's like, if this is something that, if it gets compromised, it could cause bad things. That's usually typically what you would want to be a sensitive value. So for example, the client ID, or not the ID itself, but the secret is definitely something that you wouldn't want to have, or you would want to be as a sensitive output. Sometimes certificates is another thing that you want to have as a sensitive output, because you don't want that to potentially be persisted to disk or wherever. Because if a certificate gets compromised, then folks can then issue things based off of it. Could be, could cause some problems.
Okay.
I don't know where my security hat is though.
Somebody wanted to know if you could put that security hat on right now.
I might have a security hat. Let me see. Hold on just a moment.
I love this hat so much.
All right. For those who are wondering what I am doing, I am currently generating the variables for said for HCP client ID and client secret, and those will be passed to the provider. There are probably a couple ways you could do this. I'm going to mark them as, use the lovely Terraform 0.14 feature, which is marking them as sensitive, just so they're not, dumped out to the output, and magically you'll see the secret. So this is basically going to mask it for me. And then I'm going to pause the share, because then I'm going to add the actual variables and values to a file. So you will not be able to see that. So while Andrew puts on his security hat, I'm going to put these variables into a file that you cannot see.
Oh no, he did find the security hat. Oh, that's.
And I think I was actually incorrect. All you're going to need is client ID. Oh God, it doesn't fit on my head. All you're going to need is client ID and secret. You don't even need the project ID. We should be able to infer it from those, I believe.
I like it. This makes it a lot easier, because sometimes providers can get really complicated in the configurations that they want to, consumed. Okay. So, all right, we have removed that. I have credentials now, and now I'm going to have them in provider. So, all right, I guess the easy way to do this first is to Terraform init and make sure this actually works. The security hat was, oh no, it came back. Okay. All right. So Terraform plan var file. I have a credentials file, everyone. So that's why I'm adding var file onto it. I think the captioning is going over the command lines. Let me pop this up. Maybe that will help everyone. Terraform plan var file credentials. All right. Let's see. Can I get past plan?
I'm going to say yes.
And in which case you see all my role policies and yay, happy things. Okay, excellent, nothing changed. Okay, all right. So I got my provider in theory connected. It didn't throw an error that it was, potentially problematic authentication. So I have an HVN already created, Andrew, because it takes a while to create an HVN sometimes. Is there a way for me to import the existing one into a resource?
Yes, we did implement import functionality for HVNs.
Okay.
And so, let me see if I can find the format of the ID. I think it's just going to be the ID that you have for your HVN. Let me just double check.
Okay, cool. So where would I check this? I'm going to dig through this for a second. This is the provider for those who are curious. And what I need to do is find the resource for the HVN. So the funny thing about import is that it has to go somewhere to a resource, right? So let's see. Got docs. Boop. Here we are.
This is the network peering. I think you wanted the HVN resources, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there we are. Okay. HCP, HVN. Okay. HVN ID, which I don't really have yet. Cloud provider. We only have that on AWS right now, so I would just keep it as AWS, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Region and CIDR block. I'm gonna leave it kind of blank right now, and we're gonna import and see what happens. I don't have any real awareness of the ID yet. I don't really have any real awareness of the CIDR block, for example. I just know that I've already created it. So let me just Terraform import. Sorry, everyone. Also, let me know if the font isn't good as well.
Oh, it looks fine. At least to me. I'll ask in the chat though.
Okay. All right. We're going to call it example. Import HCP HVN.example. And you mentioned it was the ID of the HVN?
Yep.
Okay.
With
Network.
ooh, wow, that's an interesting ID. I would have expected it to be a different. Oh, that one works. Never mind. Just keep on going.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm used to seeing them be more like slug ID-ish and not UID-ish, but I think that's still gonna work. That's what your ID is.
Keep in mind, like I have probably been beta testing HCP and I probably just never took down this HVN. So I'm sorry, HCP team. I probably should just clean this up, but I just can't. I just refuse to take down the HVN.
It's all good.
Okay, command not found. I don't know why this doesn't.
That's it. That's an.
I think you
OG.
have a new line. There you go. Yeah.
There we are. Will it like it?
It does not. No value for required variable.
Oh. Do I need to do this? Okay, hold on. Var file credentials. There we go.
Nothing's happening, so it must be working. Invalid provider configuration. What in the world did you do?
Value for role ARN is not available.
It doesn't
It's in here. Oh no, it's not in there. Pause.
Also, the font is okay.
Font is okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Role ARN. I think there's something interesting about imports though, because it never really seemed obvious to me, but I thought I don't recall ever really needing to have a variables file, like a var file, but maybe I'm missing something there, but.
Can you ignore it because it's a warning and go to the error?
I don't know. There's also a couple other like really funny, weird things that I've done. This is why. Okay, we're gonna try this again. Let's see. Import. Invalid provider configuration. Huh. Value for var role arn is marked as sensitive in remote workspace. This operation always runs locally, so the value for that variable, that's a warning. But it did import, did it?
Right. Look, I mean, yeah, it looks like it did that, and then maybe it was proceeding to try to do some other stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Let's
Yeah,
just,
you could look at your Terraform state and see if it's been pulled in.
All right, let's take a look. Terraform state list. I see no HVN. What a puzzle. Well then.
Interesting.
All right, well, we found something. Here's what I'll do. I'll create a new working directory called HCP and maybe move some of this config over. And then we'll see if maybe we can get that. Because in theory, I probably could just get away with taking the outputs of the HVN and then, or anything configured with HCP and then passing it to the cluster. As long as I migrate it, right?
Yeah, I think that's.
Oh, go on.
And I think you're correct. It's like if you want to try to get all the stuff imported into a specific directory just for the HCP stuff, I think you should be able to wire it into the AWS ones.
So someone in chat is asking, does the Terraform plan show the AWS resources, because it seems like the AWS provider is not playing fair?
The plan, let's see. I did change the backend, so it could be that it is not pleased with something. I did change the backend. Well, I did turn off remote on the backend. So, okay. So the plan does show something. Apply var. Okay, make sure that's not. Var file, credentials. I mean, given that it doesn't have any changes, I'm wondering if maybe it just doesn't like the role arn or something. The import and the role arn, it might be a couple just different provider interactions that are not behaving correctly together. Oh, well, now everybody sees that. Okay. Well then, let me just take this out of the way. General mode. Save variables, take that, delete. Sorry, for those who are off screen, it is my credentials, so that's why you're not seeing many changes. All right, so let's just try to separate out the HCP configuration. I guess this is a pretty good indicator of some Terraform practices in that, like, do you really want to, if you're backporting or you're migrating, and this is a question I think, Tracy, we get quite a bit, right? Which is like, if you're backporting or migrating existing resources into some existing configuration and they're multi-provider, you have to think carefully about whether or not you want multi-provider, right? In sort of one giant working directory. You might run into some problems there. So this is what we're going to do. Providers.tf. Okay. Tracy, do you have any questions about?
I do. Since what problem was the HCP provider for Terraform trying to solve anyway? Like, why do it? What is this for? Why do we need this?
Well, similar to the question that Rosemary had asked me, is that having a UI is great if you want to click around, but trying to make it like Terraform very much enables like rapid, well, not necessarily making the provisioning faster, but like it makes it faster and easier to provision the resources on the platform. Like as long as you know what you're trying to declare and you just kind of have your Terraform, like that's all you have to do, and it saves you having to go through the UI and doing some of that. Really just trying to simplify the complicated workflows, and maybe hopefully we'll get there, trying to do some of the federation. That isn't necessarily like the easiest thing to do. And so if we can do that with declarative Terraform, it makes it a lot easier because all the Terraform logic behind the scenes makes sure that works and handles errors and stuff. And then you just say what you want, which is the magic of Terraform, right? You want to just declare the resources and then let the providers handle all the heavy lifting and stuff.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Okay. So I did get it running. Yay. Okay. We did get it planned. We didn't get that weird AWS provider error, which is someone pointed out in chat. It might not be playing fair. You know, and then argument region is required. Okay, so I'm going to just add region. I believe my region was, what is my region? Not in there. Where is my region? And I did see in a comment that someone is like, this is very stressful. Folks, this is stressful. We can all acknowledge this is stressful watching me type and trying to watch this work. But, you know, I guess that was the whole point of this stream, which is to show like, hey, we're not perfect. I by no means am perfect, you know, and I could say I've done enough Terraform. But, you know, if there are any recommendations that, you know, y'all have on, you know, improving, or any like easy ways, easy techniques you have in terms of importing, et cetera, because you can tell we've been having some struggles importing, like drop in the chat. I'd love to learn it. Oh, okay, HVN ID. All right, so now Terraform import. Let's try this import again. Oh, look. Not found in credentials. Oh, who cares? That's just because I added credentials. Okay, so it's imported. Terraform State list. Oh, I know. It's a, no. Yeah, and again, like, you know, it's not a knock. You know, I think it's like, for me, it's, a lot of people have commented to me like, Rosemary, you're weirdly not self-conscious while you're typing on camera. And I'm like, no, sorry. I am very, very, very self-conscious typing on camera. So everybody goes through it. Okay, so we've got this HVN imported now. Now I'm going to try to run a plan again, but it keeps saying that HVN ID is not required. Something is not right. Okay. So basically, this is kind of like a problem between what is required and what is a required parameter or a required attribute versus what we've imported. Mm-hmm. So even though we've imported this into state, I feel like it's still not happy with something. So maybe I can do this.
Andrew, there is a question. I'm not sure if you can actually answer it though, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Somebody wants to know how many folks worked on the provider.
Oh, I could answer that. There was several folks that were involved. I don't know if I should just list off their names, but there was about 6 of us all together that kind of worked collaboratively to build it out. Given that there was different types of resources, like we had the HVN, we've got the console cluster, there is console snapshots. We were able to kind of split up some of that work so we could have multiple parallel work streams, and that allowed us to kind of make good progress on it in a rapid amount of time. And so I think there was about 6 of us in terms of the engineers that were working on it, but we also had input from a few managers and design and stuff as well.
Oh, somebody said they also want to say, well, somebody else said, was it the same people? No, I don't think so. Okay. Yeah, no, someone different. Also, just want to say we've been moving our deployments from pure Ansible to Terraform, and it's making our lives so much easier. So thank you all. I will let Terraform. Thank you.
Nice. Okay, so we've got the HVN imported. Yay. A couple of nuances. I know, right? Got it. A couple of nuances. We had to copy the HVN ID and sort of like backport that into the resource. This is pretty common when you have a Terraform import workflow. You have to import a certain number of attributes back in. But you know, the good news is that the plan does run. I'm gonna, 1 second. It's got this error, and I know we have like concise diff now and all sorts of things, but for, you know, sometimes we don't have that luxury. Okay.
Concise diff is my favorite thing, and you know what? You're really not using it.
I don't, well, you know, it doesn't have much. There's not much of a diff to diff.
Concise about it. Okay.
Anyway, so basically now all of the resources are imported. So the HVN that I have is imported, but what I didn't do was create a console cluster on that HVN. So here, notice there's no associated resources. So I'm going to create the console cluster. So now I'm going to refer to the handy dandy docs, which basically copy the example for the schema. Most of the docs. Now, are these docs auto-generated, Andrew, or you have to go through and update them manually?
So those are auto-generated based off of how we define most of the schema. Now, there is some docs where we like describe out what a resource block might look like, but typically some of them are auto-generated based off of the code itself.
Nice.
I did post a link in the chat earlier from the other stream with the docs generator repo in there.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So nice. We can create a console cluster. How long does it take to create a console cluster in HCP exactly?
In HCP, it takes less than 10 minutes or so. I've seen some get spun up in 5 minutes. I think 7 is about average-ish. It takes a little longer on HCS side, but we're not demoing that one.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, cool. So it's going to create, so something I probably should have done was actually put the console public endpoint URL in retrospect, but we're not, so that way at least people could take a gander at the console UI. But in this case, does it by default have this console public endpoint URL set, or no, that's by default?
Yeah, it's by default, it's private.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you've already kicked it off, we can let it go. But if you wanted to change it and specify, I think it's public_endpoint, okay. You could make that true. Was this just a plan? Have you applied it yet?
I did apply because I TF YOLO'd.
Oh, it's fine. Like there's still gonna be lots of other interesting things that we can show for this without needing to just show the UI. Like if you toggled that, there'd be a URL you would hit and it'd be like, here's the console UI. But we're not showing the console UI. We're doing a Terraform provider demo, so yeah. I think we'll be all right.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So while this is creating, walk me, what else is in this Terraform provider? So I see the console cluster. I see the HVN. I see also a couple other things, which first is console cluster root token and console snapshot. So why offer a resource with the console cluster root token and the console cluster snapshot?
So the root token is a resource that's used for like bootstrapping the cluster. And so we wanted to make this be something that you're going to be able to read when you need it. It's not something that we actually persist on our backend for security reasons. And we wanted to make it a resource so that whenever a cluster is created, it is returned as one of the outputs on that. But if it's the case that you wanted to generate another root token, we wanted to expose a resource that allowed you to do that without necessarily having to like tear down and reprovision another cluster. And so that's why we have the root token resource to allow you to do that.
Nice.
And then the other resource that you had called out, which was the snapshots resource. And I think somebody in the chat was asking about like what my favorite resource was. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually going to call it the snapshot resource because before I even started working on the providers themselves, I actually did a lot of work to build out some of the APIs to expose console snapshot functionality. And so it was kind of my baby. And so whenever I was building out the resources, the console snapshot resource, like I was happy to interface with APIs that I actually built. And so that's where I will say that the console snapshot is my favorite resource. Now, what is a console snapshot? This is just typical as what you would expect with existing console functionality. It allows you to take a snapshot of the state so that you can restore it as needed, or if you're going to do some kind of something that might be a high risk operation, you want to capture your state beforehand, you want to take snapshots. And what the snapshot resource does, it allows you to do creates, updates, deletes, and renames of your snapshot. We actually haven't exposed any functionality to do restores via Terraform because it doesn't fit the model precisely. So if it is the case that you do provision or create snapshots for your resource and you want to restore them, you're going to have to go to the UI to execute that restoration. But that is what this resource is for managing any snapshots that you might have for your cluster. And that's why it takes a cluster ID as one of the fields on the resource itself. And then the other one that I think was the fifth one, which was the AWS peering one. That one's for some of the magic of the peering, which maybe we'll get to.
Nice. I feel like this is so console snapshots is like more of an operator, I guess like the mapping is console snapshot, the operator snapshot, correct? Is that what it's a direct mapping of, or it's something a little
Yes,
bit?
correct. Like it essentially makes the exact same kind of snapshot calls that you would expect to the console service that you're running. Yeah, console servers. So if anyone's familiar with how you do snapshotting within console, this is essentially a proxy for that type of functionality.
Nice. Okay, let's see. Did it create? Someone did say like, yes, you created it like easiest production console cluster creation ever. It might legitimately be. I mean, like usually if you're creating console, this ECS guide, for example, was really agonizing. Not because it was, ECS or anything. It was just the complexities of setting up a production ready console cluster is really nuanced, right? You have security to consider, you have ACLs to bootstrap, as Andrew pointed out, you have to snapshot, back everything up. And so it's not as trivial. Like you could write Terraform modules to do it for you, but you may not, fully know what your configuration is, or you may get a configuration wrong. So what's really neat about this is that I get it after 5 minutes. Wow. Okay. That's fast.
A fast one.
Nobody favors you today.
I know. It must be my old HVN.
Oh, somebody said T of YOLO, easiest production console cluster creation ever.
Yes.
Okay, so now here's my HashiCorp Live cluster. Now you can see it in the console, kind of nice. The downside is that the cluster URL is private, so I won't necessarily be able to get that quite. I won't be able to show the UI to anyone on the stream, but that's okay. So the next thing is that now that I've created it, what I would usually do is start setting up the peering connection between my VPC and the HVN that I had, right? Because now I know my console cluster is live. So is there a way for me to set up that peering connection as well? I think there's a resource in here. Okay, let's do that. Okay. HCP AWS network peering. All right. I'm going to copy this, but basically let's go through provider HVN. So this creates the HVN. This is the peer. So this would be my VPC, right?
Yes.
And the CIDR blocks can't be the same. Keep in mind, if you peer, you can't have the same CIDR blocks for the VPCs.
Yeah, don't want to
yeah, okay. I think that's the case. I think I'm on 10.00016. And then I got the peer ARN as well as the HVN. So, or the network peer here. And then I would want my VPC to be the acceptor, correct? So basically the HVN is, when I run this resource, the HVN is basically starting the peering request. And then I would have my VPC accept it.
Yes.
I think. Okay. VPC peering is hard. I'm trying to keep it,
You're telling me. This wasn't a part of the provider I worked on. So I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure what you're saying sounds correct. Yeah.
All right. All right. What I'm going to do is go in here and I'm going to do something that probably it will overwrite the functionality of my existing module. So I mentioned before I had a module that did this peering, and I probably will overwrite it. I didn't actually enable peering, so it's probably not going to do anything. But this means I think I can rip my module out. The only difference is that I might need to add some security groups. So there's that. By the way, if anybody is curious or would like me to pause and dig further into some additional config, let me know. All right. So I'm going to pull this provider. We're going to pull a couple things. First thing is I am going to basically add a couple, the AWS provider. And this is the beauty of decoupling modules properly. Lesson to be learned. Sorry, I have my camera in the way, so I'm going to duck up and down. But this is the beauty of decoupling the modules correctly. So what I'm going to do is, because we couldn't, the AWS provider wasn't playing fair when I put the HCP provider into the existing AWS config, what I'm going to do is actually retrieve the data from the AWS VPC resource that I've created and use data source to basically pass all of the necessary configurations in. So I'm not going to use the outputs. I'm not going to use that. Instead, I'm just going to hopefully get this working with the right information. And I won't need, hopefully I won't need to reference or do any Terraform outputs.
Hopefully.
So hopefully, live demo.
My cat has decided to make an appearance.
Yay.
Oh.
Okay. So when doing this, it involves step 1, declaring data source. So I'm going to try to get the VPC ID, which I think is, I think you pretty much already, it's close over here. Okay, AWS VPC peer. Let me actually, AWS VPC data source. Clearly I've done this, everyone. You've seen this, my search history now. VPC ID. Could get the VPC ID. So I'm going to pass in the VPC ID. I already have region. So we're going to just pass in VPC ID, which I did output before. So let me just cluster Terraform output. Please output. Here we go. So this is a VPC ID. I'm going to just copy that over. Again, might be a little bit, you might have some there. I think if I actually tore this down and recreate everything from scratch again, it might actually work. The problem is that it takes like 20 minutes to create the ECS cluster. So it might not actually be as convenient, unfortunately. Okay, VPC ID. I'm going to do that. Okay, so now I've got the VPC ID ready to search, and then go back to your handy dandy example here. So this requires me to set up the peer, which I'm going to need to peer. So let's set up the peer. AWS VPC peer. No, that's not it. Hold on. So I need to configure, this basically says I configure it. Do I need to configure a peering connection? Oh no, maybe this is the opposite. So I don't need to necessarily configure an AWS. I don't need to start the peering connection. Okay, I just need this resource, right? Okay, HBN ID, HBN peer data dot peer ID, data dot AWS VPC peer owner ID. What is this? Oh, that's interesting. Peer region. AWS VPC. I think, was that a typo in the doc? This thing, data AWS ARN? Oh no. Well, that's a new one.
No, I think that's correct because it's like it's a AWS ARN resource with the name peer.
Uh-huh.
So I believe that that is the right syntax to reference that data block via the peering line.
Okay. Any questions in the chat while I'm meandering my way through this?
Yes, it's actually for you. Well, us. Well, either. Would love to see a workstation setup stream about how you all configure and use VS Code for Terraform, GoLang, etc. It's fun to see it live in this demo. So what I told them, that's actually come up more than once. So I don't think we mind, maybe, possibly, kind of, sort of, jumping on a stream one day and showing how we do that, because I'm pretty sure not everyone configures their stuff the exact same way, but I think we probably all use a lot of the same extensions.
Yeah, probably. We should do that. We do. I don't know why we don't do it as a stream.
It's interesting because I just use the GoLand IDE for all of my work. I haven't used any VS Code for terraforming and stuff.
I was
Oh,
going back and
really?
forth for a while, and then I
Yeah.
went back to I couldn't and I could never get used to the shortcuts on GoLand, so I went back to VS Code, and
Yeah.
yeah, so that's where I've stuck for been for a while.
Yeah, I've used VS Code for a while. It's just easier. It's just much easier. I know the GoLand plugins are really great. So, I know a number of people who prefer the GoLand plugins.
I think there's not a definitive answer on this. It's whatever workflows work for folks that are convenient and stuff.
Sure.
I don't think it's not a hill I'm going to die on to defend the saying that GoLand's better than VS Code, or somebody's going to come in and start defending Vim and Emacs and stuff too. So
I was actually waiting on that in the chat. It hasn't happened. The other thing that I'll hear if they're not jumping on Vim or Emacs is the language server is better on this one than it is on this one, and I'm like, oh, that one could go all day.
yeah.
So yeah, I like both. My hands like, I think, VS Code more.
I prefer 4 spaces in my tab.
How dare you?
Oh no. No, don't start it, please. Okay.
I was just making a joke. I didn't actually think it was going to dig that deep.
No, somebody put shots fired in the chat.
Oh.
All right. So basically, we've got this mostly there. It's going to grab the region. This peering. So this AWS peering resource this is just triggering HCP to start the peering. And then on my side, which is the VPC that I'm controlling, I need to basically say I'm going to accept it. Let's hope this works. So, and again, what I'm doing is I'm not like pulling, in this case, I am pulling the output, but you can, in the data source for the VPCs, for the VPC searching, you can search by filter. So you can search by tag, etc. Sometimes I'll search by tag. Yeah, just heads up. But this case, just to expedite things, I'm just going to pass the VPC ID. All right, so Terraform, let's do this. Okay, we've got peering, and let's hope this works, because I think that would be the last piece of it, and then security groups, but we're going to omit the security groups since we're coming close to time. But for those who are interested in taking a look at this, I'll refactor this, once the provider is out. But if you are curious to reproduce this on your own, I'll send the link. I'll drop the link in Twitch.
Is it to your examples? Because I have it.
Oh, yay. Yeah, you do.
Oh, yeah,
have
you got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. If you want to reproduce it, I'll refactor to add the HTTP stuff eventually, but for now, keep in mind you will have to do it UI by the UI. Okay, so it looks like it's been created. I guess the one way I can verify is going in and saying, look, peering connection accepted. Yay. That's pretty neat. We could go and register the clients, but I think that it pretty much is the same workflow after this, because I've enabled the peering, so I just need to enable the security groups to allow console to communicate with my ECS cluster. But that was pretty simple. I mean, I think most of it was just involved me trying to fuddle around with the provider and documentation. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward. I liked it. I thought it was good.
Yeah. Try to make it be as easy as possible. We like the HashiCorp experience, seamless and intuitive.
Yeah, exactly. So we're coming up on time. Anybody else have any other questions? Tracy, do you have any other thoughts?
I have none. I've enjoyed this. This has been fun.
Yeah. Just because I'm now curious about this resource, because this is like the bane of my existence, which is trying to configure console without retrieving the root token. I'm just going to do this for the sake of. So let's do this. Let's see if I can retrieve the root. Do I have to output the root token? Is that the?
Okay. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. You're trying to use the root token to do the which part was it?
I'm just curious if I can output the root token for further continuing. Oh, secret ID. For further, if I wanted to do additional automation, let's say I wanted to configure console ACLs with Terraform, et cetera, I would need the output, the root
Oh yeah,
token.
yeah. Okay. So then, sorry, for whatever reason, my brain wasn't clicking on that. Yeah. There should be a mechanism to allow you to output that token for sure.
Yay, look at that. Since you don't know the console endpoint, no one can use this token, but
And it's private too. So.
Oh yeah, and it is private, so no one can access it anyway. All right, we're great.
Yeah. And if you
Awesome.
were to generate another token, that token becomes invalidated.
Oh, wait, hold on.